Director at AlixPartners, and Jess Awtry, Senior Vice President at Newsweek. Jess and Chris.
Thank you. All right, what a great way to start. That was fun. So by way of introduction, Chris Mulh, I co-lead globally AlixPartners, what we call Operating Model and Org Transformation Group. I'm a partner and managing director there, and I'll let Jess introduce herself.
Hey everybody, Jess Awtry. I work for a legacy institution. No, work at Newsweek, Senior Vice President, technically of audience development, but I touch a little bit of everything, including how we're rolling AI out through our operations. Fun story.
Yeah, and we're super excited today, and kind of, based on the polling of hands and people who raised them at the beginning of the session today, it sounds like most people here aren't an AI native company or from an AI native company. So what we're here to do today is talk to you a lot about how to transform your existing structure into more of an AI forward structure organizationally. Fortunately for everyone, Jess is one of the people who raised her hand that her company has been significantly transformed from AI, and she's going to share a lot about that today and what that journey looked like. So hopefully it's a good 30-minute session. So obviously we're at an inflection point, but before we get to that inflection point, I think it's important to maybe look backward. And so to do that, we're going to start by looking at the US Fortune 500 in the year 2000. And so look at the companies that are up there. You all recognize them, I'm sure. Pretty diverse set of companies back at that time, the turn of the century. Now look at the 2010 list. You'll see it changed a decent amount. You'll see some banks popped up on the list and some oil companies popped on the list. And so why is that? In the banking industry, there was deregulation, there was significant M&A activity, and so they seized upon that, they transformed, and they climbed the list. In the oil industry, global demand for oil went up significantly. I think the price of oil went from like $30 a barrel in 2000 to 140 in 2008. And there was significant M&A in the oil industry, and so those companies seized the opportunity, they transformed, they moved up the list. Now let's look at 2020, so just 5 years ago. List looks quite a bit different. You notice tech companies, and look at the rise. So if you look at Amazon, Apple, and Alphabet at numbers 2, 4, and 11 there, look at the rise that each one had between 2010 and 2020. So you start to see tech companies coming into the fold. And by the way, I think the interesting thing about those three companies is they had an initial product that they sold, or a service that they sold, but that wasn't enough to get up to the top of this list. And so they had to really think through what are alternate sources of revenue, how do we innovate to figure out a way to climb up the list, and they did that. And we'll talk a little bit about what they did and how they did that today, a couple examples. So I think the message for all of us today is really like, you don't want to be the companies that fell off the list. Wherever you are on the list today, you don't want to be the companies and leading companies that are dropping. You want to be innovating, you want to be transforming. And so hopefully we can give you some tools and some things to think about today that are going to help you along that journey. So we think AI isn't a tool you're going to use and optimize within today's hierarchical structure. Typically we're in org structures. That's what I do for a living. You design these hierarchies and these departments, and you don't want them to be siloed, but they end up being siloed. AI is going to completely change that. It's going to obliterate that. Because hierarchies can't scale with AI's speed. And you heard Daniel, an AI native company, talk a little bit about this. We think companies need to move more toward a networked structure. And there are kind of two different transformations that are going to happen, and two ways network structures can help you. The first is you've got to take your legacy company and you've got to transform with AI. And so that transformation, and while you're on that journey, you need to adopt the network structure for the teams that are working on the AI projects that are going to help transform your company. And then at some point, there's a large transformation effort that you're going through that's going to be finished, whether that's 2030, 2035. And then you're left with whatever is resulting. So you've got a bunch of jobs that were automated and went away, kind of to Daniel's point. But you have jobs that remain. And so the question is, how do you structure that? And we also think that is more of a network structure. And we'll give some examples and talk about what that might look like today. But I think the important stat here is in the middle, which is companies in 2024, this is a Forrester study, companies in 2024 who tried to implement AI and kept these rigid hierarchical structures almost all failed. And you can see the stats on the right and some of the problems they had. I'm not going to go through those, but I think the news here is you've got to rethink your organization and the way you're structuring it, especially at the onset of this transformation. Whoops.
You push the red button.
Yes.
Like this. So yeah, Newsweek, it's funny. I've worked for Newsweek for a few years now, and everybody has a Newsweek story. Whenever I say I work for Newsweek, someone's like, oh, you know, my dad used to get that. It was in the magazine rack growing up. Or my favorite story is, oh, every time I see Newsweek, it makes me hurt. And I'm like, that's not a great brand association, because I think of it at the dentist's office and like getting my teeth drilled on. But the reality is that, you know, print for us is a fun side hobby, but we are huge, as most media organizations are digitally. We reach 1 in 6 Americans, fastest growing English language news site. I don't say all that to sort of toot our own horn. I say that because we are apprehensive about the future. All of the gas that went into our tank over the past 15 years is not in good shape today. Social media, we saw sites rise and fall based on social media. Look at BuzzFeed. It was a powerhouse a decade ago, and it's barely in existence today. No longer a friend, it's a competitor for time and attention. Gen Z gets their news and their content via Instagram and TikTok, not by going to websites, certainly not typing in www.newsweek.com on their phones. And so that's okay, we'll just lean into Google and SEO, right? Oh, no, wait, you know, AI is changing the search game, all the little snippets and the summaries, that is taking commoditized content and rendering it valueless. All those like chicken breast recipes on websites, useless now, because you can get the summary. Can't lean into that, but you know, that's okay because we have lots of other content we can do. Oh wait, AI is attacking that too. It is so, before this session is over, you all could go to chatgpt.com and make a custom GPT and connect it to the National Weather Service and have it write automated stories on weather for every part of the country. By the end of the day today, you could turn it into a website and start earning programmatic revenue. So content is getting commoditized. And to make it worse, the value of a page view is less than it ever has been. And so what we've seen is our notion of big scale being part of our future has to change, or we have to figure out how to do that very, very effectively. Enter AI, which we're gonna get to in 1 second. But before we talk about sort of how we did it and the roles, Chris, back over to you.
Yeah, so what we did at AlixPartners is some research on the companies. It's, you know, it's fun to talk about the Blockbusters and the Polaroids and all of these companies that failed, but we said, let's look at the companies that rose up that list and actually successfully transformed. What are some of the characteristics that they have in common? And so I think strategic vision and ambition, and we'll talk a little bit about this today, but it's really making sure that you set a goal of where we want to go as a company. What is our vision? How are we going to get there? How are we going to use AI to transform the business? Customer-centric innovation. So as we do that, it's not just doing it for the sake of transforming, and it's not just standing up a bunch of pet projects, you know, that everyone kind of has on their desk. It's really putting the customer at the center and saying, how am I going to add value to the customer as I make this transformation? Because ultimately, that's what's going to keep you afloat as a business. Organizational ability. We'll get into a lot of this today. How do I kind of flex and redesign my organization in a way that supports this transition? Cultural adaptability. So Google, back in the day, had this 20% time rule where every employee got, everyone probably knows this, got a day a week or 20% of their time outside their regular job to innovate and think about new things and new ideas and bring them forward and put them on the table, which fueled innovations like Gmail and a lot of the things that ended up bringing them the revenue that it took to climb the list, like we saw on the first page. Leadership vision. So at Microsoft, Satya Nadella saw the writing on the wall. He had a workforce of a bunch of know-it-alls, and he needed to change the culture to a bunch of learn-it-alls. And so they changed completely. They went from quarterly release cycles on their products to daily release cycles. And so they had to completely retool and reskill their workforce to do that. But he had the vision. So if you have that leadership vision, that leadership sets the strategic vision and ambition. That's really the key to moving this forward. And then finally, number 6, holistic business reinvention. So like we talked about with the Apple, the Amazon, and the Alphabet, you've got to rethink, how am I going to get revenue? You can't be a single product company anymore. A lot of these native AI companies like Lemonade, they're coming for us. They're coming for all of us. They can operate on a fundamentally different cost structure because they're started AI native. They don't need the number of employees. You heard them say, look, we just added employees. We may never have to add another employee again, and we might be able to keep growing our revenue. So with that cost structure and that level of profitability, that's going to be tough to compete with. And so we've got to really rethink, how does our business need to look in the future to be able to compete with these folks?
Yeah, thanks. I love what Chris is talking about, because it mirrors our journey so much, but we just sort of tumble headlong into it, and you all have strategically mapped it out. So it's good to know we're on the right track. So this is where we talk a little bit about our journey, and then on the back half of the deck, I'm going to try and adapt it for some lessons that you all could maybe take home. But for us, it was about figuring out what we had first that we knew we couldn't give up. And that's Newsweek's primary business model. Anytime you read a Newsweek article, we get about $0.015, which isn't going to pay the mortgage, but you multiply that times 5 million people a day, and it starts to work out. We could not walk away from that. We are not ready for that. We know that this will not be the engine that powers our future, but it is sure the heck powering our way to that future. So we had to leverage and lean into that model. The goal used to be create as much content as you can, cash the check. Now it's create all of that content in a more optimized way that we'll get to, but then how do we use that page view as the start of a relationship to bring people into a world that is insulated from AI? So the punchline of this slide is going to be talking to you about all the things you need to do with AI, and then talking about the places where you do need to insulate your organization from AI. We decided we had to optimize our greatest asset. We write hundreds of stories a day. If we can save 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes on each story, that's great. So what did we do? I mean, I started my job as a copy editor in the middle of Nebraska, late nights. Those jobs days were numbered since Clippy came on scene. So Newsweek has a lot of copy editors. They are great guardians of the written word. So is AI. And so we decided copy editors weren't going out the door, but to the point of being limber and learning new abilities, we started working with our copy editors and teaching them to be better assigners, better shapers of stories. And now all of our copy editors are effectively creating content. They are working with AI. They are helping to build stories. They're adding context to stories. And it's been a really brilliant way to sort of lean into that optimization and help them find new and better growing skills. It turns out they're great assigning editors at getting the gist and genesis of a story and can help shape that. And this is the second time in the hour that we're going to reference Iron Man. So, Marvel, Disney should get a little credit for this. But, I'm going to go really deep here. There's sort of Iron Man, and then there's Ultron. If you're really, really big Marvel nerds, Ultron was a big, giant, powerful cyborg, and ultimately a robot. And that's the generative AI that's flooding the web. We wanted to be a person in suit power armor. So all of our journalists, every single journalist at Newsweek. My boss will hate me for saying this because we haven't gone officially announced with it, so maybe don't tweet this part, but every one of our journalists in the next month will be using AI in their story creation process. Now, if we're not careful, that boils us down to samey automated robotic text. But what we're instead doing is letting the journalists use AI to create their drafts, to find all of the context and the background that AI is great at. But the journalist comes in with a human approach. They know who to call. They know who's going to call them back. They function in a way a lot like PR comms people. So they get hired because of their subject matter expertise and the heart of and the size of their Rolodex and who they know. And so increasingly, it's less about how well can you write and how can we augment you so you can spend your time focusing on what you got into this business to do, which is talk to people, tell great stories, and share narratives. But then on the same side, we are pivoting away from AI into a much smaller area because scale is difficult these days. So we're using AI to increase scale, but we're now looking at our people as not just creators of content, but as true subject matter experts. And this is where I'm jealous of you all, because what do you have in your organizations? You guys have the geek in the corner who knows everything there is to know about the stuff that your company creates or advises on. Those are the subject matter experts. Those are the people you can leverage in this world and go straight to consumers with without having to pass through the media. So we're leaning into that. I mean, we have reporters who were held hostage by, people, we're using their brains. They're spending more time directly talking to consumers through webinars, through, virtual event spaces. We're going deep into VIP segments. I mentioned those 5 million people. We get 60 million people a month. A penny, 2 pennies, 3 pennies a page view. That's the same value as having 50,000 digital subscribers or 5,000 VIP subscribers. So we're leaning very hard into these deep channels of fewer people that we can super serve through very human connection. And that really is where we get into this notion of things that we know are insulated from AI. And that's some degree of empathy, but human connection, making you smarter through convening community, through bringing people together. We have people who are joining virtual webinars once a week now, where they sit around roundtables with people who have opposing views from them and discuss things. And those aren't things AI can easily do, replicate that connection. But the big takeaway, the learning that we've had from all of this is that AI is not a technical problem. I think it's brilliant merging this notion of AI and your human resource, because ultimately AI is a cultural problem. The technology is simple. Like I said, you go create that weather website in an hour. This is about convincing your people that it's going to be okay. This is about convincing your people that AI is not here to take your job. It's here to accomplish parts of your job so you can go be higher, better, more valuable humans. And so for us, this has been a 1-year journey, starting with our early adopters and making sure that they could see it was safe. Fastest way to get a journalist to trust AI is to show them how bad it is at the core parts of their job. But it really was about cultural adoption. And again, as we get into the last 10 minutes, I want to talk to you about some adaptability things, but back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Jess. Mm-hmm. I think the important thing to take away here is that it's not just a one-time event that we're talking about. It's not just a few projects. You need to continually think about reinvention over the next 5 to 10 years. And so let's talk a little bit about how do you actually do that? How do you embark on that journey? So like anything, we typically recommend that people follow kind of a crawl, walk, run approach. And everyone in this room, based on the show of hands at the beginning, again, is at a different stage of this journey. So I'm not going to go through the journey itself. What I'm going to do is talk about the 4 things that no matter where you are on this journey are, we think, the most important. The first is the first bullet under pilot there. So really making sure that you're defining the objectives of AI. What are we trying to get out of using this? And what are the success metrics? So how are we going to know if we're achieving those objectives or not? Make sure you get that set up. And then underneath that, making sure that you're picking high impact use cases. So what are the processes that we can reimagine with AI? They're going to have the highest impact on those metrics that we define that help us achieve that strategy. And then what does the team look like? You need to have a good team. And so if we're talking about a cross-functional process, it's touching a bunch of different departments. You need a business executive to lead that from the business side. That person should be flanked with people from each of the departments it touches. So like ambassadors, functional ambassadors. And that team is tasked with defining the requirements, defining the vision. What do we want to get at the end of this process? What are our metrics and objectives that we want to achieve? And they're working hand in hand with an AI team. So think of engineers, think of UI, UX people, think of quality people, think of data scientists. And they're working as a collaborative team in an agile way. So they're running sprints where the team's developing their wireframe. They're sharing that back with the business team, making sure it works. Then they're developing their MVP. They're making sure that that works. Then they're putting it into production mode. They're making sure that works. And so that team, those people are all from different parts of the organization, but they're working together on this project as one. And that's what we're talking about when we say networked organization. You need to build these pods that are focused on a common objective. They go achieve that objective, and then they move into another pod to work on the next project. The last thing is governance. And so from the beginning, when you're thinking about AI, it's really important to have strong governance. We have an automotive client that we went into that may or may not have been on the first chart that I showed, who said, "Hey, look, we're on the right side here. Like, we've got all these data scientists and engineers, and we're working on AI. The problem is we have so many projects going on. We have no idea if we're using the high impact use cases. We have no idea, what our core objectives are with a lot of these projects, and if they fit with where we're trying to go as a business. And so we need you to come in and help us kind of wrangle that." And so, we're standing up governance for them to make sure that they can manage that, and that all of the projects that they're working on are going to be the highest impact things. And they kind of work down the list in that way. And the other thing about governance is you don't want to be too bureaucratic. You want to set the vision, you want to set the goals, but then you want to let that team run. That team that I mentioned, that team needs to be able to sprint and run without doing a bunch of bureaucratic approvals and checks with people along the way. So those are the 4 important things to get right. Here's some, bureaucracy is the biggest thing that's going to get in the way of that success and of doing those things. And so here are some ideas. Everyone's bureaucracy is a little bit different in their businesses. It comes from different places, different people. But here's some ideas to hopefully help you cut through that. I talked about governance already. I'll go to number 2. So dynamic resource allocation. So at Amazon, they had these 2 pizza teams. And the idea there was all these teams get a little bit of funding to start these projects, but they have to define what their success metrics are, and they have an initial metric hurdle rate. So it might be when you develop your MVP, your minimum viable product, it needs to achieve some metric. And if it doesn't achieve that metric, that project gets canceled, and then that team gets redeployed on the next project. And they saw that by following that methodology and that approach, it gave them 30% more success than following a traditional R&D approach. And then number 3, culture. And you heard Daniel talk a lot about this at the onset. Culture can kill you. And so Google has Project Aristotle. And what they did there is they created psychological safety for their teams. Typically, if you bet big on an idea and it fails, a lot of companies will kind of, they don't want to talk about it. Those people are persona non grata. Not Google. What they do is they celebrate failure. And they bring that team and they have them present to all the other teams working on projects. And they say, "Hey, why did you fail? Tell us what happened. Why did you fail?" And the team talks about why they failed, what they would have done differently if they could go back and redo it. And what that does is, first of all, it shows that, hey, it's okay to fail. And secondly, all the other teams learn from that team so that hopefully they're not making the same mistakes that team made. And so, that's a way to kind of change the culture and the way you think about it.
Yeah, I'll pick it up. And, Chris and I said we were going to call an audible when we were up here. I could tell we really nerded out over pulling this together. Ain't no way we're getting through this whole deck. So I'm going to breeze through a couple slides kind of fast, but please know, always happy to answer questions and talk about sort of adaptability. But I wanted to give at least a few pragmatic tips. When I talk to organizations out there, in this case, a lot of media organizations, about how to adapt AI, I kind of run into 2 sorts of people. One is like, yeah, okay, I get this AI stuff. We can use it to automate at scale. You're going to hear me refer to that a few times in the next few minutes here. Hyper-personalization, if there's one great way it can be used for PR, for comms folks, it's forget the one-size-fits-all press release, forget that external communication. You're now drafting 18 of them and dropping them into the right segments at the right time. You are tailoring that message for an Instagram audience. They get that. Democratize content, it levels the playing field, allows smaller brands to compete with big brands who have got teams that are 20 size the time. But then I also hear a lot from the other camp, which is like, AI is going to totally destroy us. It's going to destroy the industry. It's going to take over the world. And they're not necessarily wrong if we're not careful, because your organization, it could lead to commoditization. If you overuse it in the wrong parts of the area, you lose that distinct special sauce that gives your brand its unique voice, and you sound like ChatGPT 4.0 or O3 or O3 Mini or whatever the latest model is. It has obviously inherent bias problems. It's only good at what it's trained at. We recently were using off-the-shelf bots. We moved to a series of bots trained on Newsweek content with our ethos behind it, and the content got a lot better because it carried our brand voice. But you have to be careful to do that. Obviously, there are trust, authenticity risks. Our initial bots did the worst thing possible, which is they hallucinated quotes. It was so eager to satisfy the prompt, and we asked, we want you to go find other examples out there where people are talking about this on social, and it was so eager to find those that when it couldn't, it just made them up. And if there's one thing AI is good at, it's making things sound plausible. That was a terrifying risk. So obviously that didn't make it into production, but there are very real risks to AI. The other thing to know is you launch into this in your teams, if you haven't already gotten to it in a big way. If you have, you're going to see this. It does not lift your team up all equally. It best boosts your skilled people who already know their job well, as far as getting the peak output, but it will give your people who are lower skilled a bigger jump. It will amplify mistakes. If you've got someone who's soft in an area, AI will not help them get better because they don't know how to talk the AI through the problem. The need for human coaching is so important. This was a Harvard Business School study from a year ago, so it's fairly current. They found some bottom skilled, some top skilled employees. I would hate to have been the person, hey, we don't take you some tests. Why? Don't mind why. And then they gave them gave them AI to do their work. That was the resulting output. So it did not make the bottom skilled people better than the top skilled people with AI involved, but they saw a bigger jump. However, the top skilled employees both got the higher output. So boost for those folks versus like a 40% boost for the others, but the best members of your team can benefit. So as you look to AI, deploy it differently at different skill levels of your organization to sort of manage that boost. This is one of the slides I'm going to go through quickly because I think a lot of you are already here. I wanted you just to go some baby steps to some medium steps on how you might get started with AI. And yes, sure, you can generate external communication press releases. It's a great tool to figure out contacts and where you want to go to get your message in there. You don't have to go as much to a muck rack or these resources anymore just to go ask AI, or you can go train your own bot to go places people can't, to mix data sources, to say, find me the most popular websites in this area and the 3 reporters who have the best positive sentiment scores. It's just amazing at coming up with those results and just can drill right down to the people you need to connect with. But moving to that middle copy, you can take your message increasingly direct to consumers. One of the things we're playing with in the lab right now is, sure, we'll write our news story, but we have these 2 virtual personalities, and we tell people up front they're virtual personalities, but they actually sit and discuss the story in a sort of podcast format. And it's fascinating because they'll say, oh, hey, they have different names right now, but hey, Crystal, I was reading this Newsweek story about whatever. Did you see and the other person will say, yeah, I did actually. One of the things I found most interesting was this. And they talk like 2 morning DJs. And it takes that level of story to a different place. And that aspect of human communication, when we've tested it, people remembered and retained more information when they heard that conversation. But one of its greatest assets is personalization. If you all are not big on newsletters for your organization, direct-to-consumer newsletters, this is the time. And then obviously predictive engagement. Like we said this morning, one of its greatest assets is in figuring out what your people are likely to do next, what customers are likely to fall off, what segment you're not going after that you should be, which people in life cycle journeys are at risk versus which could go another level. I'm going to skip through this fancy diagram entirely because I want to get back to Chris. This is basically a funnel. For those of you who love marketing funnels, I just turn it on its side. But it really talks about where to deploy AI, and that's at the far end or bottom of the funnel is where you stay away from it. Employ it at the top, not at the bottom. Those really high value users, those deserve your white glove bespoke treatments. And just as I wrap this portion, one of the things I want to talk about for a second is getting away from AI. So for those valuable folks, the foolproof counters that we're leaning into, because we don't want to get caught in the next Facebook algorithm dumped us, Google's algorithm dumped us. So we're looking for those human connection things, and that's conversation. And that's a place that I think a lot of brands can go that they're nervous to. We go to where our readers are. We go to Reddit. Obviously, we go to TikTok, Instagram. We bring them back on site. We incentivize on-site comments. We have our reporters engage with those people by closing that feedback loop. Again, that's that human connection that AI can't have, so we double down on that. newsletters. I can't say this enough. Human-powered, not automated newsletters, but human-powered hosted newsletters is the gift that keeps on giving for your company. It helps you build a repository of first-party data. It helps you build consumer relationships. It helps you be the media entity. I could talk about that for an hour on its own. The last thing I would say is get your experts in the same space as friends. We've used a lot, we've pioneered a lot of group texting sort of things where a journalist can text with their fans and they can text back. It's not an app, it's SMS. It's right where the texts are from the grandma and their friends and their baseball group text. There are ways to get your experts in with those people and create that B2C link. We don't see that being replaced by AI assistants anytime soon. So yeah, just back over to you, Chris, because I'm going to skip these pragmatic takeaways, just to basically say, use AI to commoditize the road stuff. Stop being precious about your releases and start focusing on like the white glove treatment for your valuable consumers. So yeah.
Yeah, which is a perfect transition. I'm going to try to close out quickly here. So what does it look like when all of that automation work that Jess just talked about is done? So you have today a traditional pyramid structure, most of you, most likely. We're talking about ending up with a more modern network structure. So let me just try to bring that to life a little bit. If you look at support functions, so over on the right there, things like finance, IT, HR, legal, what we think it might look like in 2030 or 2035 is something more similar to like a Mayo Clinic model. So you've got a general practitioner. Imagine you've got a general practitioner sitting at a dashboard, and they've got all the metrics, the operational, the organizational, and financial metrics across the company that make the company run, that make the company tick. And they can see when something lights up red. And they're like, we've got a problem over here in this situation. That can be, we've got a direct material cost that's gone up 25%. We don't know why. That could be, we've got high attrition in this area over here. It can be anything. And what they do is they probe into that and say, why is that happening? And they develop an action plan for it. And then they dip into their specialists. So you've got all the employees who remain after all that automation are true artisans, specialists at particular things that your business needs to survive. They can be in-house, they can be contractors, depending on how much you need and use that particular specialist skill set. But they'll be deployed against those issues to help fix them. Then they go back into the pool and then they get deployed against the next issue to help fix that. So we think that's a little bit about how that networked model might work in the future. And I know we're at time. Jobs are going to go, jobs are also going to come. I think we're a little more bullish, at least the World Economic Forum is, than what Daniel was mentioning. The important number here is on the bottom right. So the World Economic Forum is estimating that the net job creation, so that's $170 million jobs created minus 92 million jobs removed. The net job creation is going to be 78 million across the globe by 2030. And by the way, that's less than 5 years from now. And those 78 million might not be in the same companies they're in today. They might be in new companies because we think the way that companies are set up is going to change. But you want to be in the 86% in the top left there of businesses that are transformed. And you want to be contributing to that 19.9 trillion in the bottom left of global economic boost and value. And so how do you do that? You need to transform. So I'll leave you with something, we'll leave you with something a little provocative, which is if your C-suite hasn't debated firing itself already this quarter, you're behind. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.